We've got Dave's with us. But before we jump into that, don't forget, if you want to join us in our community, remoteaf.co, click the community button and join us in our community. We've got a great community going on there that talks about all things remote. But today, we're actually going to focus a little bit on how you use the actual patterns that Remote AF uses. And we've got Dave, who's been working with a lot of different organisations. So we're going to have a fantastic time. Dave, you just want to introduce yourself a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, morning. Hi, Tony. Hello, everyone. Dave McKenzie, as Tony said, one of the co-creators and guides within RAF. So excited to be here. I guess my background, really quickly, Tony, 15, nearly 20 years in agile ways of working, project, program, and portfolio delivery. I'm an engineer by trade, engineer by education, very bad engineer by execution. So I moved into the project delivery space. So I guess that's my background. Yeah.
Great. Dave was along for the ride. As I said, he is one of the co-creators of the remote agility framework, but he's also been using the patterns in anger, which is one way of saying it. So what I want to talk a little bit about today, Dave, as we move through, I was being very formal, wasn't I, calling you David?
Yeah.
Yeah. Enjoy that while you can. Yeah. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how you string them together. You have a very, we've talked about it before, and you've got a really nice way of how you link them from the strategic intent into the delivery to get the result. So let's just start with that a little bit first up.
Sure. I think to sort of answer into that, sort of lean into that, it's a bit of background of how I think about organizations. The simplest way to describe it is I think, and Tony, I've said this to you before, but I think organizations, any organization, all organizations really just have one problem to solve. The problem they're trying to solve is how do they connect their strategy to the work that they're doing on the ground. Now, a lot of organizations are really good at strategy nowadays. There's a lot of work and a lot of effort gets put into defining great strategy at an organizational level. And more often than not, teams are pretty good nowadays of doing stuff, right? We've got all these agile patterns, we've got all these coaches, we've got all this optimization that happens at the team level. They're brilliant at doing work. What I find the gap that often occurs in organizations, the big challenge they're trying to solve nowadays is how do I take the strategy? How do I decompose it? How do I break it down? How do I route it into the teams correctly in such a way that I know the teams are delivering the right work? And I think the important term there is the right work. They're doing it well. What's the right thing for us to work on? And I think if you think about it that way, it's the one problem organizations need to solve. It's the one problem they all need to try to solve. It's the one problem that they're all trying to solve. And it's the one problem they're all struggling to solve. And it's a great opportunity for myself as a guide to actually help them on that journey. And the way I do that is, as you said, is using the RAF patterns, but not just individual ones, actually using the suite of them to connect them together. So one flows to the next, to the next, to the next, to enable us to build that bridge between strategy and the way teams work. Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing. So let's talk a little bit about that, because as we know, and if you're watching this and you've not really had a lot to do with the remote agility framework, one of the things about it is very modular. Yeah. So you can plug and play the patterns, but that's one of the very interesting things about it is how you actually plug and play them. So let's take us through a little bit of that journey, Dave,
sure.
from where you start, from where you end.
Yeah. Well, I think of the patterns themselves as, like you said, modular. So we can use them to build a foundation. You can pick and choose your own adventure. It's one of my favorite things. It's pick your own adventure, and you can use the parts that make the most sense for what you need to solve. I love that about the patterns. What I really like, though, is I guess the term I'm using is meta pattern. It's probably the wrong term, but this overall way of connecting different ones together. So if we're thinking about that strategy to execution part, what does it really mean? So what are the things that I need to solve there? I need to define a strategy. And I need to, once I've got that and understand my current operating environment and create and define the strategy there, I need to break it down in some way. I need to decompose it. And then I need to, once I've decomposed it, I need to route it to the right teams. And then I need to have the associated teams launched to be able to support them. And then I need the teams to go off and do their delivery. So if I think about the patterns end to end, we've got the strategy decomposition, we've got the strategy creation, strategic design patterns within RAF that we can use to help a company or an organization define their strategy, or at least refine what they've already got into a way that's understandable that we can decompose. We've got the inception processes, I think we call it, what's the initiative post-mortem now, or pre-mortem and post-mortem.
Pre-mortem, post-mortem, yeah.
It's changed since I started them all those times ago. But we've got that opportunity. So we take the strategy, we're able to decompose into its component parts. So we use the post-mortem for that, or the pre-mortem for that. You've got your big room planning processes, your quarterly planning that we use to route into the different teams. So we get the teams together. We've all been through those patterns as well, into generating the work. And then you've got your associated launch patterns to make sure you got your teams ready to launch on that thing. And what I try to do is connect them together. So whilst they're modular, I don't want them in that series when I'm working with leaders within an organization to be disparate, to be separate. I want them to flow. So I want what's coming out of the strategy to flow into the decomposition. So I want the same people thinking about the same sorts of ideas. So I take certain aspects that happen with the strategy part and make sure it's pre-filled, make sure it's being brought across. So when I run the inception part, when I run those pre-mortem parts, I can actually sit there with the same leaders and say, well, this is what we did here in strategy. This has been brought across. This grounds us in where we're talking, and we drive down into that. When I get to the big room planning or the quarterly planning side of it, I'm doing the same sort of idea. I'm bringing parts across from the individual decompositions of the strategy into the planning, and then I'm feeding that information back in. So I'm trying to connect them so they feel like a connected pattern of separate workshops as opposed to individual modules. No.
Yeah, I really like that. I'll pick you up on meta patterns. Love it, John. you heard it here. Dave likes meta patterns as well. But let's think a bit deeper. Let's think a bit deeper in that connective piece there. One of the parts that I like that you're, and obviously I haven't been towards that, but you don't discount governance in there. So I have seen some guides who stick strictly to the patterns, but you've got to build thinking about the governance and how that links in with those pieces of the puzzle. Talk to us a little bit about that, Dave.
Well, there's no point building a system of work that takes strategy down to work really clearly if I can't actually govern it and make sure I'm doing the right things at the right points, right? Like part of delivery, part of executing on strategy is the value creation, but I've got to build the awareness around it. So speaking to yourself, this. What does it mean from a leader's perspective? We've created a system of work. What's it mean from a leadership perspective? What's the data I want to feed back at each point of that journey to make sure we're working on the right thing? So I want to tie it in the whole way. So when I start talking around strategy, I want to understand at a high level what we're trying to achieve. Obviously, that's what strategy is about. But I want to know how I'm going to measure against that. I want to understand what does success look like from that. How am I going to know that I'm making the right decisions as we move through that journey, that we're tracking towards the right strategic outcome? So I start bringing in the idea of governance because I'm starting being, well, what's that actually mean? If I'm making decisions, I need to understand how I make decisions. So I need to understand the leadership concept of governance. I need to understand the data side of governance so I can bring the right information at each point in that journey together. And then I just flow it down. So when I move into the decomposition, I start thinking about, well, how am I making decisions? How do I know this is the right thing to work on? How do I make a decision between A and B? Like people think about prioritization, they think of prioritization frameworks, which are great, but really that's just a starting point for us to have a conversation and bring our expertise from a knowledge and what we're trying to achieve together. So I start to bring that through. What's the right way to do it? What's the right way we want to do it? How are we routing this? Once it lands into the individual teams, then you start talking about your decision delegation. So what are we delegating to enable the teams, to enable us to sort of have that conversation, let them do what they do best. As a leader, how do I get out and get my head up? I talk about watching for the bushfire, don't watch for the spot fire. I think choose whatever, watch the tidal wave, for the tidal wave, not the little wave, whichever word you want to use. But we're sort of starting to go, well, get our leaders out there, get them up, let them see what's coming. So to do that, I've got to do certain things. So when I'm designing that flow, I'm not just thinking about how the work goes down. I'm not just thinking about how the teams are set up. I'm thinking about how do I need the teams to operate? How do I need the teams to work? What decisions am I allowing at the team level to happen outside of me that I don't need to be across because I need to be strategic as a leader? that tells me what data I need to know. So I start talking to leaders about, let's not talk about a metric. Let's not talk about, I want to know throughput on a beautiful bar chart. Let's start talking to leaders about what do you need to know to make the best decision at this point in time when you need to make it. We start leaning into more of those conversations over process, start to understand that, move away from heavy reporting. What do you need? And then we build into the system of work what we need to feed. So the teams are down here working to feed the information back up to leaders in such a way that it's fast, it's rapid, as close to real time as possible. It's not a massive four-page report that no one reads and takes days and days and days to deliver. What's the data that's associated to that? Once I've got that, the last part from a governance perspective, Tony, that I talk most about now with leaders is the idea of vacuum. So in leadership, in an agile world, agile teams, we know we want to be empowered. We want them to have their own sort of sphere of autonomy that they can make decisions in to run with. But the last gap is understanding that as a leader, if I'm giving that empowerment to the team, I'm creating a vacuum. So I'm moving the decision-making to a team, but I'm still here and the decision-making's moved down here and I've made this gap. It's imperative that we work with the teams to come back and fill that gap with information. So that's the governance part. So we establish the leadership down, the system of work and the leadership way we talk about it. We create the space and then we go, teams, it's now imperative you to use data, use conversation, use whatever forums or whatever we need to run, scrums or whatever term you want to use, and fill that void back in because we need that information to make the right decisions at the right time through our system. Go again. Are we working on the right thing? Is it tracking well? Do we need to make a decision that we've achieved the benefit on this? Do we need to make a decision on this that says we're not going to achieve the benefit on this? It's a sunk cost. Let's get away from that so it doesn't cost us a lot of money. And how do we break the mindset of an organization that says a project that fails that we pull the plug on has cost me $100,000? Well, no, it hasn't. It saved me $3.9 million because it was going to cost me $4 million and I've killed it after only spending it $100,000. This is good governance. This is good decision making.
I like that idea of the vacuum actually, because what you've got to be really careful with it, and you know that's why we use the patterns in the way we do, because they facilitate that conversation to make sure you're using the right things, because otherwise the temptation for leaders, because they don't have what they need, is to go back to what they used to have or to start to pull apart what they've just created, or worse still is put in the old archetypal, big program project type reporting and etc. And then you start to really, the reality is you shackle your delivery engine if you start doing that. So I like that.
And I like the facilitators. I think is the right term. So the reason I love the patterns and I connect them together is because then it's a facilitated journey, and the patterns ground the conversation at each step to enable us to ask the right questions as a guide at the right time. So you're able to identify, if you build that sort of meta pattern, I know at this point I'm doing this conversation. We've done this to get us to here. I've brought this information across. Then I ground the right conversation at the right time with the right people. We answer that question and then we build to the next. So we then take that and we flow into the next. And you can build a really nice rhythm through that generating. And I think when we talk about workshop design, building rhythm, how one flows to the next, to the next, to the next, helps us create a rhythm that's associated to going through that journey. It kind of creates a wave, and that wave helps us with the buy-in. So we've got people with us the whole way. We've got how this part connects to this connects to this, and this connects to this. And using the patterns enables us to do that because each step's guided, each step is facilitated, each step feeds the next, or one is fed from the one that happened before, and it feeds the next one, and we're actually able to connect them the whole way through. And that's part of the power of it. You can connect in at each part. You can connect in the whole workshop or the whole pattern. So you can do a whole team launch, for instance, but you feed part of it from a leadership launch, the team launch. And then when you get to the team's launch, you're feeding part of the team's launch from the team's launch. So I've got really nice connectivity. And enables us to sort of step through. But what I can do as well, as you're talking about governance, is I can cut part of the governance part and I can bring that up front. Because for this company or this organization, when I'm talking about strategy, it's important to talk about leadership. For another company, another organization, maybe at that point's too early, I do that part at a different point. So not only can do whole patterns sequentially, I can do this pattern with this part of a different pattern, and that pattern with this part of that other pattern. I can connect it and stitch it together to build a really nice map of what we're trying to achieve.
Let's dig a little bit deeper on that, because that was one of the questions I really wanted you to talk about today. So oft you don't get to start from that strategic piece. Often you get brought in to actually solve a particular problem. So talk to me a little bit about, here's my first question for you. As guides, we all have our Swiss pocket knife tool pattern that we really love.
Yeah.
So I want to know what yours is, because that's interesting for people and how you use it. And then secondly, how do you take that leap? Okay, so you did talk about it a little bit, but I want to dig a bit deeper. You've started here in, say, the middle layer. We maybe do a team of teams launch, whatever it might be, right? And then how do you traverse it both ways? Because you've started in the middle, you haven't had an opportunity to plug and play it across, because that's an obvious journey. This is not such an obvious journey, Dave.
Yeah. Well, it's opportunity, right? Like it's you if you're starting at a team of teams launch, or a teams launch, you're a guide and you're into launch a team. You can run the pattern and you can start from scratch. What I think becomes really obvious is there's certain things you want to bring in. So you open up the conversation with the people you're working with to say, well, I'm at a team of teams launch. What are the rules, or what are the policies from an organizational perspective that we need to follow?
Yeah.
That we need to fit within. We don't, we don't work in isolation. As much as we'd like to think we work in isolation, we don't. We've got dependencies all over the place. Now, they may not be work dependencies, but there's things coming. Work's coming to us from somewhere. So what's the associated policies or the rules of engagement or the guidelines that we're going to work within? What are the metrics we need to use from an organizational perspective? A lot of the time the question becomes, well, we actually don't have that. And I can go, well, actually, the RAF patterns have the team of team launch. We don't have to run the whole thing, but let's run just that part. Let's grab half an hour with the right people and just answer that question. And once they sort of see it and they start to feel it, you can sort of answer that question. You can kind of feed in the different parts. So if I'm going up chain, back up the pattern, if that makes sense, it's really about, well, we're doing this, but we need this. Do we have it? Yes or no? Not really. Okay, well, let's do this to generate that information. And once I generate it, then I can obviously run with the team launch. But at the same time, I'm starting to feed in to say, well, there's other things we want to do here. So usually for me, from a team launch, if I go up, it's around policies and it's around cadences. So what's the cadences that are occurring? So they're my sort of two doors up. If I get into the next step back up, it's where's my work coming from? What's my work? And how do I know I'm working on the right thing? That's the simplest thing. And I think that's pretty common for most guides. Any sort of cadence-based planning, you're going to look for, well, what's my work and what do I need to work on? And how do I know I'm working on the right thing? So I don't try to connect. I don't try to go from a team launch to a team of team launch and do the whole thing. What I try to do is go, well, I need this component. It's captured here. Let's do this little part and do the little part and then try to expand it.
Yeah.
If that, yeah.
I'll come back to the Swiss pocket knife one in a moment, because there's a really good question that's popped in there. Is interested to hear how you use the launch for different types of teams. It seems that it would work okay for development teams, but what about the rest of the types of teams? So that's something that's very dear to our heart, Dave, and yours as well. So I think it's a good question for you to answer.
The ops guy. Yeah.
The ops guy, we call him.
Yeah. My background is in operational teams, so sitting between engineering and ops teams. I'm a big believer, Tony, you know this, that Agile works great for IT-based teams or delivery data development teams. But the real power of Agile is your ability to adapt on the fly rapidly. That's not a development team. If you can plan a 2-week sprint, you're not changing and your scope's not changing rapidly. If you go to an operations team, they change every minute of every day. So Kanban systems in those places work really well. The same sort of idea from a launch. is the same concepts. An ops team or a business team or a HR team or a marketing team, they're all very similar in the fact that they have work that they need to work on, they have work they need to align around, they have work that they need to deliver, and they need they need ways for themselves to collaborate and be clear and have transparency on what they're actually working on. So the team launch works exactly the same. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? Maybe it's not to deliver a great project. Maybe it's not to deliver this amazing initiative or these amazing initiatives from a delivery perspective. But the purpose of a HR team or the purpose of a marketing team within an organization is just as critical, if not more so, than a delivery team. So if you take that in, we can generate that. We can generate the behaviors we're willing, are willing and are not willing to accept. That's all culture really is. So we can baseline that. We can have those teams understand what that looks like. And then really I start to think about, well, the workflow is a little bit more simple. All right. So we don't have these heavy workflows, but we can generate the workflows. We can make it transparent on how they work, where they collaborate. One of the things I tend to do is use the workflow to define where and how we should collaborate and where decisions are made, as opposed to saying, well, you need to plan on a Monday and we have a daily scrum or a daily stand-up every day. And then at the end of 2 weeks, we have a retro and we have a review and that's what the book says, and that's fine. With these teams, I kind of go, well, where do you need to interact? Where do you need to talk to each other? How often do you need to talk to each other? How interconnected is the work? So let's think of the workflow and go, how often does you need to change priority? And if they go an ops team, they'll go every day or every other day. So maybe we should get together every other day then to talk about priorities.
Yeah.
And that becomes the first event. That becomes the first cadence. So the team's launch works brilliantly for that because, again, it grounds us in the conversations and enables us to ask the question to the team and enables them to decide around what's best for them. And then we've got a way of working that actually fits really well with their needs. And it works whether you're a development team or an ops team or any type of team. And I think that's the power of it.
Yeah. So in RAF, we define, our teaming types as operational, product, and mission.
Yep.
Mission. And whether you're a development team in any of those kind of methods there, or the two ladders, it doesn't matter. The launch is based around those things that you've actually elicited there. Interestingly enough, though, and now I'm going to ask my other question first, and then I'm going to circle back to this because I do want to talk about operational teaming design, etc. in a moment, a little bit deeper. What's your Swiss pocket knife? Come on, I want to know what's your favourite pattern. What's the one that you go to, Dave?
It's a good question. My favorite pattern is still the team launch. I think it is. I think it's a really adaptable. It's a really flexible. It's a really powerful tool that you can use really quickly. So just ground a team really quickly. I think after that, the one that's probably closest to my heart is the planning one, because obviously I was involved in creating it and testing it out in the world. And it's been, the good news is it's developed well beyond where we started it. So from a bias perspective, I'd probably say the planning one. I remember being awake at 4 a.m. for a 9 a.m. start because it was the first time we'd ever run it. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I've got to work out how to do this. And the fear had come in that morning. But thankfully, it ran really well and it's proved itself over the journey. But I think the one that I think the team launch is just really powerful. It's fast. It can be fun. You can have a lot of fun with it. You can elicit some really interesting things that occur. I worked with a team, and one of the team members during the height of COVID, and we're talking about the way they want to work, and everyone's very comfortable working remotely. And one team member said, "No, I need us to come in. I need us to come in." The team launch enabled the way it was run enabled a freedom for that person to express that, they lived by themselves. Yeah. The only people they were seeing were their teammates, and they needed that social interaction. And as a team, they were able to hear that from that person. We're doing the behaviors part, and they were able to change the way they thought about the way they were going to work on the fly in the session to meet a need of one of their teammates. And I thought that's something that's super powerful that comes from enabling us to have those conversations. So I think the team launch is probably the closest one that I love. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And I think, look, I asked that question because I do want people to understand, as they're listening to this today, that we've actually steeped these in actual doing. Like, these were tested, we test them, we continue to take feedback from our guide community. People like yourself have tested them. Again, I'll go back to our CEO, John. He has a favourite saying. I said it last time I was talking with one of the other guides Fun is that, no pattern actually survives first contact.
No.
Because you find out things, and that's why we want to do that, right? So for those who are getting into this and just starting with RAF, that we have a fantastic guide community. I know I said that right up front. The reason we talk about that is because you have the opportunity to talk to people like Dave, reach out to people, myself, any of the people who are involved in it, who are actually using them, and talk about the situation that you want to use it in, or the situation that you might want to. And we're always happy to help you with that. So don't hesitate to do that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. What you've said there is they're adaptable in a sense, right? So take the team launch as an example. I've used it to design ways of working. I've used it with brand new teams that have never design ways of working for existing teams who wanted to make a change towards more agile ways of working, or more adaptive ways of working is probably a better description. I've used it with brand new teams who have never worked together. So for an existing team that's adapting or changing, I'm leaning into workflows and I'm leaning into cadences and how we want to work together. For brand new teams, I'm doing that as well, but I'm actually trying to baseline how and what they stand for and why they exist. But I've used the team launch to relaunch a team that's had a change of 3 team members, and just to re-emphasize or realign or re-baseline themselves back into how they've agreed to work together. So it's the same pattern, but depending on slight adjustments to how you facilitate it and the type of team you're working with, like the maturity of the team probably is a better word there, you can use it to solve different problems. And I think that's part of the power of it as well.
It really folds well into the question that's been asked there. So it's a good segue, Dave. You've done well. The segue into that question is we're talking about team launching, but what do you do when you've got to actually redesign the actual operational design? Yeah. And so this is something that's very clear, very close to our hearts as well, because we do a lot of that dynamic, changing of teams and operating, because it is going to change, right? So talk to me a bit about that.
Well, I think operating model, it breaks into a number of things, right? So you've got your associated teaming model that comes with, so how are your teams organized? What are the people in the teams or the roles in the teams? The ways of working. And it's not just the agile sort of adaptive ways of working, stand-ups and so on and so forth, but it's how you want them to interact. How do you want them to work on dependencies? How do we manage things that are crossing teams, crossing streams, crossing value streams, or however the construct we've got. Last, it's the product side. So how do I take back to the strategy to work is what's the pattern and how do I route that work to the teams as fluently, as seamlessly, as efficiently as possible to deliver what they need to do. So operating model for me, it combines those 3 aspects. So the first part is the operating model design pattern enables us to really, really clearly and really quickly design how we want to structure our teams. And the simplest way is, do we, structure them in value streams? What are the value streams? Why do the value streams exist? What do they own? I call it the product catalog, for lack of a better way to describe it. But if I've got a value stream, what work goes to the value stream? The portfolio manager in me is coming back. Coming out. But, I want to know what route's there. And then if that value stream is owning that type of work or is owning that product catalog, what teams do I need in there? What type of teams do I need in there to enable them to do that? So the operating model design process creates that for us. Then the team launch and the team launch and the leadership launch patterns enable us to start talking about how we want to work. How is our system of work going to be set up to enable us to deliver? So we've got our teaming structures from the op model design pattern. Now we can start talking about how do we plug these things? How do we work together? So those team launches enable us to define what that looks like. starting, leadership, how do we want to lead this? What's our system of work look like? Into the team of teams launch. So I've created the value streams. I need to launch the value streams. We use the team of team launch the value streams and set those overarching guide rails on how do we want to operate. Now, you can do something even before a team of teams launch. If you have multiple value streams, it's the same pattern. You just a higher level.
Extrapolate it out. That's right. That's what's
you extrapolate out and you step it up.
Yeah.
And then you get in the team. So you're just building really nice vertical alignment from the structure into how you want it to go. The product side or the workflow side is, again, back to the strategy. So that connection of how do I connect my strategy and break it down and decompose it into routing it to the right places for the teams to deliver across. So I need to know from a team of teams, what do they own? From a team perspective, what do they own? What work goes where? And then based on that, I've really got a decision to make, Tony, is how I look at operating model. So I look at operating model as I define the structures, and then I change the way I decompose my strategy to fit within my structures, which is fine. That's an approach. It gives you stability in how your teams are structured, which is great. The con is that sometimes work's really hard to break down in that way. So you got to be very careful about how you define the team of teams and the teams.
Yeah.
What I tend to think about from an op model design perspective is I tend to start with the strategy. Start as, what does the strategy need, or how do I need to be organized to define and work and deliver against the strategy? Which means that my value streams are a little bit more adaptive. They change more regularly. As my strategy shifts, my value streams or my team of teams need to shift as well to meet that. So we start talking about operating model design on a cadence, the same as we talk about strategy on a cadence. So when I'm reviewing my strategy on a yearly or 3-yearly window, I'm in parallel or fast following reviewing my operating model to make sure we continue to be organized in the right way to meet that strategy. The power of that is, from an organizational perspective, I'm a lot more flexible. I'm a lot more adaptive, and I'll always be really strongly aligned to delivery of strategy. But there's a trade-off. I'm a little bit looser connected, if that makes sense. So I've got to bring in the other things from a governance to make sure that we've got those connections where people are comfortable. They know why they're in a team. They know what that team's doing, and I'm not changing them in a different team every other week, and I'm not changing what that team's supposed to do every other couple of weeks. Those sorts of things. We just need to be careful with that.
Yeah. So interesting question for you. I really like this one. So, Dave, you talk a lot about linking top to bottom. What about the flow across the organization? Flow seems to be the big term, and we don't see that mentioned in the remote agility framework. That's a really good question.
Flow across this way. I'm not sure I understand the question, actually.
So the way I would interpret that is flow of work. So if you think about a lot of the terms out there at the moment, it's about flow, design for flow.
Yeah.
They talk about the flow of the work through the streams, right? We intentionally don't harbor or anchor ourselves to those terms, but we think about that in the terms of the way the patterns allow you to do that. In saying that, you think about that, Dave. I know you do, because we've talked about it before.
Yeah. When I talk top down, I'm often talking. You can think about it sideways as well, right? How does work flow from strategy through those planning cycles into the team of teams? How does it flow from the team of teams to the teams? How does it flow and gets out to delivered? The question becomes, from an overall flow perspective from an organization, is how do I want that system of work to work? So if I'm optimizing for speed, I'm optimizing for speed to value. Really what I'm trying to do is optimize from an operating model away from handoffs. It's pretty logical, right? If I need to hand from team A to team B, I've got hidden queue delay. I slow down. From an organization perspective, slower delivery or things sitting in queues cost me money because it takes longer to deliver. It just sits there. People are still doing stuff. So it's accumulating cost that's associated to it being there.
Yeah.
I'm less efficient, both from a delivery speed perspective, but from a value, a cost of value perspective as well. So if you think about the operating model, I want to, where possible, design out any of those handovers. So one of the things I sort of do, Tony, and to the person who asked the question, when I think about operating model, I try as hard as I can to push the people who are doing the designs to not have crossover where possible between value streams.
Yeah.
I don't want dependencies between value streams because that's just going to slow me down. Internally, between teams, okay, dependencies or handovers or things along these lines, sometimes I can't get away from that. But I want to make sure that I'm not crossing over from the value stream perspective. The other part is we can't have everyone in these value streams, right? It's not possible. We are going to have shared services or enablement teams or all these sorts of stuff. How do I speed that up? So I start thinking about, but the simplest way to describe that's forewarning. So how early can I let these enabling teams either get in front of the value, so build the foundation so the value streams can deliver on top of it. So if you think about an integration space, an integration team is building the integration layer, get that built so some people can build on top of it if possible. If that's not possible, let the integration team know the needs as early as possible so they can get organized around the ask. So my value streams are not sitting waiting for a piece of work to be done from across a shared service level. It's actually either being done in parallel or at least where they're connected and aware of how that's going to work. So.
For a Twitter user, so unfortunately I can't see what your name is. Sometimes with those things that it doesn't come through. But I think the other part of that question you asked is how do the patterns facilitate that? And so when you're thinking through team launch and the next layer, which we now call group launch, we've changed that from team of teams to group just to cover, because there's so many different things in that. But the reality of those allow you to plug into the patterns that Dave's already talked about and think about that span across the teams and the dependencies of flow across the teams. We just don't use the word flow, I guess, within the patterns themselves, because we, as I said, we don't anchor ourselves. We try not to anchor ourselves to these nominated terms.
Yeah, I think part of the power from my perspective as a guide, is to not think of just the team launch. If I'm just doing a team launch, that's fine. That's what I've been engaged to do. That's what I'm trying to do. But don't just think of the team launch. Think of the team launch and then, okay, well, something's happening downstream from my team. Something's happening upstream from my team. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're running the group launch as well. Change my terminology. I need to catch up. The group launch, I'm doing the team launch. I don't have to run the group launch, but I have to understand what's going on at the group level or the value stream level to enable my team to be as successful in their launch as possible. So when they're designing their ways of working, how they're going to work at the team layer, and they're making those agreements, it's within the construct that's going to support the overall purpose of the group. Because again, we don't work in isolation. The same sort of idea is, how is it going to work downstream from us if we don't own the whole scope from release? Again, take an example of a marketing team. If I don't own that whole end to end and I'm not releasing the campaign and managing and tracking the campaign, I've got to get another team involved to do that. What's that look like? How does that work? How do I connect together? And we start to think of it that way. You said, I think, try to think of the entire breadth of the pattern and how they connect together. And then even if I'm not running them, go, well, there has to be a strategy. It needs to break down. It needs to be planned. I need to have a concept of what the groups are. Then I've got my team, and I need to make sure that my team's working within that overarching thing. And then, Tony, to your point before, there's a governance layer that's sitting across there. So what do I need? How do I measure how we're doing? How do I report back? Or how do I feed back up to leaders up the chain to let them know that we're on track and we're doing what we need to do, and we're going to be creating the value that they're expecting to be delivered at whatever point.
Yeah, that's it. You'd be talking about the collaborative connective tissues, Dave.
Yeah, that one.
The horizontal and vertical of the organisation.
Yeah. I'll let us say that because I have to pay you money each time. So.
Lovely. Okay, look, I just want to a little bit more time left. The one thing that I did just want to focus on just a tad is the human content of this.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the backwards and forwards and how you think about the mechanics of it and the interactions of it. But one of the things that we're very overt about in remote AF is thinking about the human quotient of that. Talk to me a little bit about how you see that working and how that's worked, the differential in using this particular way of working.
There's a few aspects to it, right? So one of the things that I love the most about them is is just simply being able to talk to the teams about that and say, hey, it's your way of working. We're going to facilitate this, but you get to solve this, right? So if you think about change management, people aren't really against change themselves because people experience change all the time. What they're against is change that's forced upon them that they don't understand. So if you take that concept and then apply it to the RAF patterns, what the RAF patterns are doing is they're actually taking that whole change wall away, and they're actually saying, well, we need to change, and here's the reasons why. Maybe we're launching a new team, or we need to move to a new operating model for these reasons. So let's do the operating model design part. But at that point, it's no longer forced because the people that are there are defining it and designing it themselves. So my role is to facilitate the conversation. My role is to ask the right questions at the right time or provide the right examples to the person that was asking the question about flow. It's like, well, how do we, let's design the value streams. All right, but hang on, if you've done that and that, does that mean that this value stream is dependent on that value stream to do work? I'm asking the right question at the right time. My job as a facilitator is to do that, as the guide is to do that. But the people that are answering the question are the people on the ground. They're the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that are answering. And I think there's huge power in that from a buy-in, from just a humanistic ownership perspective. People feel really passionate about the things they can own because they can go, well, we designed this. Yeah. The other cool part that I really like that I see is I love coming back to an organization, say 6 months later, and hearing that they're like, hey, we really liked how you launched our team, or we really liked the design we did for our team, but we've changed it. I love hearing that because it tells me that they've taken ownership of it. They understand enough about what they're doing and they shift. Yeah. And that's too. That's the human side of it. If I think about the patterns and how I connect them, I talked before around a rhythm. That's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to take people on the journey with them, so that I want them to understand why this one flows to this one, how this flows to this one. And the simplest way I do it is I do an intro and an outro. I do an intro into the session. This is what we're doing. This is why we're here. Remember last time we ran this? We ran the group pattern. Now we're doing the team pattern. Why does this? This is what I'm taking from the group pattern. That's why we did that one first, because it's helped us do this. Now we're going to do this. And at the end of the session, I go, right, now that we've done that, this is what's next. So it's kind of like I do the intro, I bring down, and then I know what's coming next because I know the overarching pattern, meta pattern. This is what's come to this one. Ground us in where we've come from, where we want to go, what we're doing. And then after that, I go, this is the next step. So I'm taking the people through that. So I want to make them really clear around where they've come from, why they're here, and what's coming next, to help them be comfortable around that journey that they're going on.
Yeah, what I like about that is exactly the way I talk about it, Dave. Is it's really about close in person, place, and time. Right? Yeah. It's closer to where work gets done by the people who do that at the time it gets done, and understanding it. So the people that actually own it, design it, they love it, they work with it.
Yeah.
Look, we're at the end of our time, and it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on Talking Remote today. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Those watching this, we will send this out. You'll be able to get your hands on this on the All the Remote Things channel, which is fantastic that you'll see Dave twice. So fantastic to have him. Don't forget, join our Talking Remote community. It's easy enough to do. Just go to Remote AF, click on the community button, join us in our community there. We're talking about all these types of things. If you're interested in a little bit more in depth about any of the patterns, please don't hesitate to touch base with any of us or any of the guides in that community. And lastly, don't forget, if you're really interested in the concept of dynamically adaptive organizations, you'll find in the show notes the link to a white paper on that. Other than that, Dave McKenzie, guide, co-creator, and coach extraordinaire. Thanks for being on Talking Remote today.
It's been a pleasure, Tony. Thanks for having us. And cheers. Good luck, everyone.